This film will go through what to discuss when you analyze different kinds of fiction. If we begin with the characters, every book has a main character or more, and when we discuss literature and film, we call this character the protagonist. This character is the one the story is about. We can also have an antagonist in the story. If we, for example, take a look at a James Bond film, Bond is the protagonist and the bad man or woman is the antagonist. That means that he or she wants to destroy things for Bond. The antagonist doesn't necessarily have to be a bad person. It can be the other way around. We can have a criminal as the protagonist, and then a police officer or the entire force can be the antagonist. Finally, we have the sub-characters. A book or a film can contain a lot of sub-characters, and of course it can be impossible to discuss them all. That is why you should focus on the sub-characters that are important in the story and for the protagonist, and analyze their actions and relationships to the other characters. When we talk about the characters, we can also do that in the perspective if they are dynamic or static. If a character is dynamic, he or she usually develops during the story, while a static character remains the same from the beginning to the end. Other ways of describing them is if they are flat or round. A flat character is usually described very sketchingly, and you don't get to know them deeply. A round character is a very complex character, and you see layer after layer of the character. Usually, it is much easier to connect to a round character compared to a flat one. Then we have the setting. The physical setting deals with things like where are we, what planet, country, are we indoors or outdoors, how are the locations described. Then we need to discuss time as another aspect of the setting. Questions we can ask here are, what period of time in history is it? How long does it take for the action to occur? We can also talk about the social environment. A story needs to be understood in a context. If, for example, everybody is traveling by horse and carriage, we can understand that the story takes place before the 20th century. Also remember that things that were accepted during that period of time can be frowned upon in our society today. This is why it is important to get to know a bit about the time period when the text was produced and interpret the text in the light of its context. Another thing that you discuss when you analyze fiction is the point of view. That is, who is telling the story. We have the omniscient point of view, where the author tells the story and has complete knowledge about all the characters, what they think, and their past and future. Then we have the limited omniscient point of view, and that is when the author tells the story but restricts his or her knowledge to the character, just one character, usually the protagonist. The first person point of view is when a character in the text is telling the story. It can be the protagonist or another character. The character is using I as the pronoun of telling the story, compared to the two previous ones where he or she is the predominant pronoun. The final point of view is the objective or dramatic point of view, where the author is the narrator, but does not enter the minds of the characters. You are like a film camera, and you only get information about what you see and hear. The author Hemingway often used this method of writing, and as well as in the Icelandic sagas. Other aspects of analyzing fiction is the atmosphere. That is the emotional reaction we and the characters have for the setting of the work. In the movie, music and sound stands for a lot of the atmosphere, while in a book, the author describes the milieu in a certain way to invoke certain emotions. When analysing, you also have to consider the plot and the story. Simply put, a plot is what happens in the narrative and how you can put it chronologically. The story is in what order the author is telling the story, and it does not necessarily have to be in a chronological order. In Western literature, we have a certain way of telling a story, which can differ from, for example, Asia or the Middle East. This is what we call the dramaturgic model. In the Western dramaturgic model, the story usually begins with an introduction of the characters and the main conflict. If we again look at a Bond movie, we get to meet Bond, the antagonist, and we get a hint of what the bad guy is after. Then we have the rise in action with small climaxes. This is usually when Bond almost gets killed and there are mishaps for our hero and his associates. Then we reach the main climax, and that is the end game and the turning of the story, where Bond wins and beats the antagonist. After that, we get the falling action. Bond drinks champagne with a beautiful girl, talks a bit to his boss, and we as viewers or readers can relax. If the fallen action is excluded, which it often can be in, for example, French films and literature, we get a very uneasy feeling and we are eager to know what happens next. The final thing to discuss is the theme. What does the author mean with his or her work, and how do you interpret it? A book can have many different themes depending on who is reading it, and as long as you can motivate your answer in a logical way, it can be hard to argue against it. Of course, you cannot read the Lord of the Rings series and say it is about a football match between the teams Elsborg and Öster because they are chasing the ball, which is symbolized by the ring. This is to take it a bit too far. All the things that I have mentioned can be discussed in whatever order you find logical, but you need to discuss all these different elements in an analysis. This is the end of this film, and I hope you will find it useful in the future when you are going to analyze fiction.